why India's export is going to experience a 22% price shock, how the climate policies are becoming trade barriers for the developing countries, and who is really going to pay the price for Europe's green policies. With the implementation of carbon border adjustment mechanism by European Union, it is going to mark a critical shift in global trade with climate interface, and it is going to have direct implications on developing countries such as India. Hello everyone, welcome to Vajram and Ravi's Flash News. My name is Shubhangi Singh, and today we are going to understand that what exactly is this carbon border adjustment mechanism, why are we talking that it is going to affect India's export, which sectors are going to be hit most, and what are the consequences in front of us. So let us start with understanding that what exactly is CBAM. So basically when we talk about CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism, this is not something that has come overnight. This has been in discussion for past 4 to 5 years, where it was finalized back in 2022 itself, but it is going to be formally effective and being implemented from Jan 1 of 2026. So that means it is already 3 days that carbon border adjustment mechanism has been implemented. Now when we talk about carbon border adjustment mechanism, it is the world's first carbon tax which will be placed on imports, and that is why when we are talking about exports of India which are going into European Union, they are the ones which will be hit the most. Now the reason we are discussing in detail about CBAM, because this is a turning point where we will get to see that global trade and its face is going to change, where it is not going to be just about prices, it is not going to be just about quality, it is also going to be about the carbon footprint. And to understand this better, let us move ahead and understand CBAM in detail. So as I said, CBAM is nothing but a border tax, but this border tax is linked to the carbon emissions that you are making. So let's just say European Union is a country, let's mark it as A. Now CBAM is going to charge not just from other countries, it is going to place carbon prices in their own country, be it steel mills in their country, other steel mills in their country. Based on carbon emissions, they have to pay a carbon price. So let's just say the carbon price is fixed for $50 per ton. Now this is for country A, but let's just say there is another country which exports to country A. So the steel mills here would be paying higher price because they have to give carbon price to the government. These countries which do not have any carbon price in place, just like India, we do not have any carbon tax in place. The government is not getting any carbon tax. So that means this steel mill in country B is at an advantage. So European Union wants to take that advantage away. They are saying based on emissions, you are also supposed to pay a border tax when you enter European Union. And just in case your country charges some carbon tax, we are going to offset that. So any import that is going into European Union, that will happen based on CBAM certificates. Now how those CBAM certificates would be made? Based on quantity of goods that has been imported, and most importantly the carbon emissions generated during productions. This certificate will basically show that how the EU emissions trading system and the carbon price which is fixed here, how it is going to be levied. All in all, the whole idea is to ensure that the carbon leakage is prevented and foreign producers are also facing the same climate cost that is present in European Union. And in totality, in effect, when carbon border adjustment mechanisms comes into play, it will basically extend the climate rules which are present in European Unions to the countries which want to export to European Union and keeping the producers in European Union and other countries at par. Now that we have understood what exactly is carbon border adjustment mechanism, now let us move to understand that which sectors we are talking about that India is going to be hit and why are we worried that India is going to be hit. So when we are talking about CBAM and the initial implementation, in the initial phase, it is going to target energy intensive and also trade exposed sectors, which includes iron and steel, aluminium, cement, fertilizers, chemicals, electricity, glass, paper, oil refining, etc. All of these sectors are energy intensive and they are also trade exposed. Now, these are the sectors in which India majorly exports to European Union. Now, European Union has the very simple idea because they are energy intensive. They are significant in international trade and there is a high risk of production which will be shifting to low regulation countries. That is why we are covering these sectors first. Not to worry, European Union has clarified that later we are going to enhance the coverage to other industries as well. They have their reasons, but when we are talking about the list right in front of us, we have to see especially iron and steel and aluminium. These are the sectors in India which export to European Union largely. And that is why we are worried that India's export will take a hit. Because when we are talking about India's export, the main vulnerability here is that India's main export are first steel and aluminium. That means we are part of the list. Second, both of these sectors are carbon intensive in nature. So that means the carbon emission here is higher. And if carbon emission here is higher, the carbon cost that we have to pay, that will also be higher. And this happens because that India's industrialization is still coal dependent. That is why the carbon emissions are high. So as a result, we are not only in the list which sectors are being covered in CBAM, we are in the list in a way where we have to pay the highest carbon emission tax. And even if Indian producers, the most efficient ones, if they have to pay this higher CBAM cost that we are discussing, they would have to cut off their margin to actually play in that market. Let me give you an example, starting with, let's just say $100. So Indian goods and European Union goods initially of same price, they were paying carbon cost, that's why their margins were lower. Now these also have to pay carbon costs. Let's just say this becomes $110. Now to be in competition, if they want to do that, they want to have to reduce their own margins so that the price remains competitive. So their margin will be shaved off because they would have to make sure that the CBAM cost is borne by the consumer there, and for that they would have to keep off their profit margins. In this context, when I am talking about, in this very context, it becomes important for us to understand two things. That why are we worried that we have to pay more carbon cost, and second, how it is going to impact the exporters. So let us start with understanding that why are we saying that we have to pay higher CBAM cost. The higher CBAM cost comes because of the steel production technology that we have in our country. So when we are talking about production technology, in India we predominantly use blast furnace BOF, which has very high CO2 emission, and higher CO2 emissions mean higher CBAM costs. Furthermore, there is limited availability of steel scrap in this method. When we talk about other developed countries, they have the advantage because they are using better technologies such as electric arc furnace, that is EAF. This technology, it gives more scrap, it is lesser in CO2 emission, and they will be facing lesser CBAM costs. So because of the technology and the industries our export is going from, we will be bearing more of the CBAM cost. So CBAM is structurally taking advantage of the developed countries, giving the advantage to the developed countries and putting more pressure on developing ones. Now coming to the second part which we are discussing, that why we are talking about that the exports will be largely hit. So as I explained that every shipment that will go to European Union, it will have a carbon linked cost and we have to pay the higher CBAM cost. Why? Because we are using the mechanism which have the highest carbon emissions. In this context, exporters would have to reduce their prices by 15 to 22% so that this CBAM tax can actually be adjusted here and the price does not change in the EU market. So as a result, the exporters will have reduced profit margins, they will have limited export volumes. They would want to reduce the export volumes because it will be also associated with certification and a lot of procedure, and there is a probability that in long term we might lose European Union as a market for the exports permanently if this does not play out right. So all in all, it seems like a downside, especially for the export markets of aluminium, steel and the iron industry as of now. And the worst hit amongst this would be MSMEs, because MSMEs are the key pillars of the export in our country. So basically, in order to get a CBAM certification, there has to be a verified plant level emission data. MSMEs usually buy from big plants. The big plants are not going to reveal their data, and in case of absence of data, what EU does is EU applies default emission value. The problem again is with default emission value, because default emission values are always higher than the usual ones. That means the MSMEs would have to pay for inflated carbon costs, and MSMEs will be absolutely uncompetitive in terms of price in just one day. So CBAM is not only putting a crack on our steel, iron and aluminium industry, it is also threatening the export oriented MSMEs in this context. But is it also bad? Because when we are talking about CBAM, the idea that we get to understand that we are trying to ensure green transition. But is the green transition really happening? That the main intent of carbon taxation is to fight climate change, but is it really fighting climate change? So based on recent report by UNICTAD, it highlights that CBAM, which intends to fight global CO2 emissions, it can reduce it only by 0.1%. But it will have a significant restriction in terms of exports, especially from developing countries. So this clearly highlights that the main cause that CBAM is trying to fight, it is kind of getting underwhelmingly fulfilled, but it is creating a bigger problem, that it is hindering global trade, especially where it is much required by developing countries. So climate benefit is minimal and development cost is extremely high. So as of now, CBAM seems more like a trade barrier than a climate effective solution in whole of this situation. And that is why it becomes absolutely important to understand the perspective of developing countries and why they are opposing CBAM. A basic insight I have just given you, that how a climate tool is going to be a greatest global trade restrictor. And in this context, let us understand more, because when we are talking about common but differentiated responsibilities, that the climate law is recognizing that the nations that are developed, they have the differentiated higher responsibility, and the developing underdeveloped nations, even they have common responsibility but comparatively less. So the developed countries have caused most historical emissions, and CBAM, which is placing everyone at the equal level, it is ignoring the developmental differences. Furthermore, it is against the WTO compliance. CBAM is going to act like a non-tariff trade barrier. As of now, you are putting it as a carbon tax, but what exactly it is just a tariff in form of carbon taxation. It is going to violate the non-discrimination rules which are sitting at the core of WTO. Another thing that has been brought out from our end, that is when India clarified on its position that when we are talking about CBAM, it seems that it is unilateral, it is arbitrary and a barrier to trade. And over the years, in the longer term, we are definitely looking to gradual shift to low carbon manufacturing. But this hit, which is an immediate problem, needs to be addressed through dialogue and through diplomacy. Other than that, a way forward would be making sure that we have a proper domestic carbon measurement system as well, so that when we are talking about green transition, we are part of it and we have a mechanism set in, because as of now, India lacks in this situation. Furthermore, if we are saying something that is unilateral, we need to enter that conversation and make it a mutual thing with mutual agreements, mutual recognitions with global groups, European Union, other countries as well. What are your thoughts in this? What can be the way forward for India in such a situation? Let me know in the comment section. That was all from my side. I hope you have gained some clarity on CBAM. That was all. Thank you so much.